Built by horse players for horse players, AmWager is designed for speed, power, and ease of use. AmWager brings CAW-style tools to everyday horse players, including Dutching, ABC Ticket Maker, and Pro Percent, an advanced betting tool that lets you assign weighted percentages and build multiple structured wagers with a single click. Every month, AmWager turns the odds in your favor with 0% takeout on select tracks. These promos offer you up to $100 more for your winning bets and giving you value for your wagers not offered anywhere else. Rated 4.7 stars on Google with over 200 reviews, AmWager is trusted by horse players who expect more from their wagering platform. If you're looking for better tools and better value, you need AmWager. Void where prohibited. For terms and conditions, visit amwager.com. Must be 18 or older, 21 or older where applicable. Gambling problem? Please call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE.
Welcome to the Sport of Kings podcast, episode 368, sponsored by AmWager. Go to amwager.com to see all their promotions, including the 0% takeout on win bets at Saratoga on every Saturday in July, including this Saturday, July 4th. So you can bet at 0% takeout into the Saratoga win pool, in which the CAW teams are throttled down. That's about as player-friendly a bet as you will find in 2026, so take advantage of it. As always, I welcome your feedback on Twitter/X. My handle is @Derby1592, and this week I am joined by special guest Matt Bernier, NBC racing analyst, and until very recently, a FanDuel racing analyst, for a detailed discussion about races 5 through 9 at Saratoga on Saturday, which includes the Grade 1 Belmont Oaks and Belmont Derby. The show will focus on finding and exploiting value. We'll talk about our strongest handicapping opinions and how we might leverage those opinions using optimal betting strategies. Hi, Matt. How's it going?
Chris, I'm good. Good to be with you again. Thanks for having me back on. It's been a little while, but now that the shackles are off, I'm free to talk about many different things, including Saratoga, which, you know, for the longest time, for the past handful of years, I haven't really done the deep dive into the spa because with the former employer, we weren't really covering Saratoga. So now it's nice to get back full throttle into New York racing, and no better time than now to kick it off on opening weekend.
Yeah, it's got to be a little bittersweet for you, but you're right. There's always, every change has opportunities. So now you can spend a little time on Saratoga in the summer, which is great for horse players.
And for me too, going back, I mean, I'm sure many people feel this way, but especially, you know, where I grew up in Western Massachusetts, this was actually closer, Saratoga, than Suffolk Downs was in Boston. So this was the first racetrack I ever went to. Everyone talks about it, you know, kind of ad nauseum, but deservedly so. When Saratoga's running, there's really nothing better. I love Del Mar, don't get me wrong, but you really can't beat the quality of racing up at the spa this time of year. And granted, it's a little bit longer than any of us have ever been used to, but starting July 4th weekend, it's a good way to kick off the summer.
Yeah, it definitely is. I'm really looking forward to the entire meeting. Also, I will be heading out there in 3 weeks. I have my new book out. I always got to give it a plug on the show, Betting on Horses, available at betwiththebestmedia.com. And I'll be doing a book signing at Saratoga on July 24th. So any of you listeners out there, please stop by, say hello. And if you have a copy of the book, I'd be happy to sign it. If not, go to betwiththebestmedia.com. and you can get a copy. I think you'll get something out of that. A lot of wisdom from a lot of sharp players in there. But, you know, you mentioned Del Mar. I'm looking forward to the Del Mar meeting as well. They're very different places, very different kinds of meets, but both are great for players. And I'm going to be making a trip out there on August 22nd, Pacific Classic Day, for a book signing. So hopefully to see some listeners of the podcast at both sides of the country, Del Mar and Saratoga this summer.
Being able to take in the best of the best on both coasts, there's really nothing better than that. And, Pacific Classic Day, another one that maybe it's not quite what it once was at one point, but you never know who may or may not show up. I always was surprised, Chris, and I don't know how you felt about it, but when the Breeders' Cup was out west, I just always assumed you would get more participation from the East Coast runners that may be looking with an eye toward November. And I know we had it last year with Fierceness, but beyond that, there haven't been a ton of East Coast shippers, at least legitimate contenders that would take advantage of that. And I know that's not going to be the case this year, so it's a bit of a moot point. But always interested to see when maybe you get a little bit of a curveball. And maybe the calendar's a little bit different this year as well, knowing that, with Belmont opening up in the fall, you're going to have a little bit of a void at the end of the Saratoga meeting for that big marquee event for the older horses. Maybe you do get a few that want to travel across the country and run down San Diego area.
Yeah, and there's enough older horses where maybe some will be avoiding each other. And the thing about the Pacific Classic, it's a mile and a quarter. There's just not very many, grade 1 mile and a quarter races on the calendar. So I agree with you. I'm surprised more don't take advantage of that. But I think shipping's a little more of an issue now. They lost, the major company that did the transporting. I guess that's made it a little tougher for these top class horses to move around as easily as they once did. So that might be a factor, but we'll see. We definitely have a better set of older horses that are still competing this year. We saw that last week. That was a good race. So I'm looking forward to the summer. I mean, for horse players, Del Mar, Saratoga, summertime, it's definitely the place to be. And I'm really excited about Saratoga because Naira's, taking steps to try to better manage the CAW teams. I think that's really big for players. I think players need to respond. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But this is going to be the most player-friendly wagering environment you can find, and you combine that with the best racing in the country. I mean, I don't understand why people would want to play, not play Saratoga. So let's hopefully the players will respond, and this will be a great meet. And the weather will cooperate, which is going to be an issue again this weekend. It seems like every weekend at Saratoga, so we'll have to hold our breath with that as well. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, one last thing, Chris, to your point with the weather. I'm not quite in Saratoga area, but where I am in New England, we're recording this on Thursday. The next 3 days, I mean, you're looking at low to mid 90s, and that's before you factor in any kind of humidity. So if you are going to be out at Saratoga over the weekend, just plan accordingly. And everybody wants to enjoy a beverage here and there. Make sure you get enough water in you as well.
Yeah, water might be better than alcohol, at least early in the day. One of them kind of dehydrates you while the other one hydrates you, and you got to be careful. Yeah, I hope they're proactive. If they decide they're going to do something like change the schedule or cancel or whatever, any of the races on Friday or Saturday, I hope they let us know in advance. But it looks like it's a lot iffier on Friday than Saturday. It seems like the weather, at least the heat, breaks a little bit according to the forecast. So I think Saturday racing probably is on, but it looks like from a potential thunderstorms, which can always roll through and change things, there's a higher probability on Saturday. So, that's part of Saratoga. That's one of the things about Del Mar that's nice. You usually don't have to worry about that. Saratoga, you never know what weather you're going to get. So you always have to be prepared.
You joke about Del Mar. It's basically climate control. In Saratoga, you can go from a beautiful day to an absolute deluge that comes ripping through, and the next thing you know, the sun comes back out. But you've always got to be on your toes, waiting for that thunderstorm to come rolling through.
Yeah, and the wind. Yeah, it's fun. That's part of the charm of Saratoga, the weather.
That's it.
So before we get into the races, the specific races, I like to ask the guests sort of what their high level, their kind of approach, how they analyze races, how they decide which races they're going to play. In your case, typically you have to analyze all the races, but how do you approach that? And if you do decide to bet, what makes you decide you're going to bet one of those races?
Yeah, as more and more time has gone by for a myriad of reasons, take out the computer wagering, you name it, I have become more and more convinced that making a score is the way to get ahead. I know Andy Beyer wrote about this years and years ago, and I feel like it's only been amplified recently. It's not to say that you don't want to sit there and play. If you see an opportunity, whether it's a win bet or an exacta, whatever the case may be, but for me, I've got to a point where I try to leverage an opinion that preferably would be some sort of a price. So the biggest scores I've had over the past few years have really been centered around a payoff leg and finding a horse that's going to get a little bit overlooked. And so often we've just become accustomed to talking about how the computer assisted wagering groups, you take a look at the doubles, but those get exploited very easily. That's not one of those things that has any real juice at this point anymore. If you get to those kind of hidden legs, even a pick three is starting to get a little bit more exploited, but the pick four and the pick five, if you can find a hidden leg with a bigger number in there, and granted, I understand with the 50-cent minimums, they just spread. But the point is, if you can find an 8, 10, 12, 15 to 1 shot, maybe even north of that, into the payoff leg that you like. And in my head, I would say, I want to bet this horse to win. The goal then becomes, if I can link up in a pick three, pick four, pick five, pick six, take that 20 to 1 shot and turn them into 200 or 2,000 to 1 based on whatever my original denomination is. That's kind of been my approach for the past few years. And I'm trying to play fewer races individually and lean more into finding that opinion. And we'll talk about it here in this sequence, because while the horse that I'll pick in the final leg of the sequence in race 9 is far from the likeliest winner, it's the kind of horse that I think is going to get lost a little bit in the wagering. And if I happen to be right on this day on Saturday, I know I'm going to get paid. And that has very quickly become my approach. So when you're analyzing a race, it's one thing to sit there and identify the likeliest winner and project out what their off odds will end up being. That doesn't necessarily mean that a bet is coming. And I think that's something that some folks kind of misconstrue when we would sit there and talk about races. I would say, well, maybe the 5 in here because of X, Y, and Z. But I'm trying to just offer up information that you can do with it what you will. If you want to completely disregard it, if you hear something I say and you say, oh, well, maybe now that makes me reconsider and maybe I want to bet the horse to win or use underneath an exactas, that's your prerogative. That doesn't automatically mean that I was betting the horse, and I think that's why I've never been a fan of the idea of picks, air quotes picks, because you got to look at the tote board. You got to look at what the odds are being offered, because just kind of marrying yourself to an opinion or to an idea, man, that's the road to ruin. You're never, ever going to get ahead in this game. It's so hard to get ahead as is. But if you're just very stubborn and stick to whatever your opinion was at 10 a.m. race day, man, I think you're in for a really long day and probably a longer career as a horse player.
Yeah, I can't. I totally agree with you. And in the book, Betting on Horses, a lot of it's kind of developing what I call the gambler's mindset, where you get beyond just picking and analysis and really understanding that to be successful, you have to identify value and find an edge and try to leverage that. So I think that's what you're saying, and I absolutely agree with you there.
Yeah, it's to me, and it doesn't have to be a multi-race bet. That's just kind of my approach that I've taken. But let's just say I'm making it up. Say there's a price that you like in a race, a full field, that maybe you don't even think they can necessarily win. But if they become an underneath key, you need to basically have a leverage point, in my opinion. I think the people that just kind of spread buckshot and try to hit something, you're going to cash some tickets, but the amount of money that you're going to lose on the way to doing that, you're not going to make up for it. I don't care how big the score is. In all likelihood, there are going to be those very rare instances. But unless you're getting some sort of a kickback, that's not the most efficient way to go about it. And I just don't think long term that's a successful route to making money.
No, definitely. You can't spread your way to success. But it does sound like you maybe sort of shifted towards playing more horizontals, looking for like some price horse that you can really leverage and trying to make a score. It sounds like in the past, maybe you were a little more playing individual races, but you've kind of shifted. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it was probably a combination of things. I think we as horse players all go through peaks and valleys, but my own personal history, it's not dissimilar from other things in life. But I can go from red hot, a stretch of a month, whatever it may be, where I feel like I can do no wrong, and no matter what, it all works out. And then I can have a 2-month stretch where it's as if I've never opened up the racing form before, and I can't make heads or tails of it. So the thought for me kind of became, rather than just try to grind away, Again, not suggesting I don't make win bets either, but I found that when I'm doing that, it doesn't usually yield great returns as opposed to when I do find the one or a one that I like and play into that. It's not to suggest that you hit them all, but when you do hit them, those are the ones that are making a difference as far as your bottom line is concerned and long-term success goes. So you're making up for those losses and then some. I just got to a point of I didn't feel the need to continue to just kind of bash my head against the wall and say, oh, well, today was a good day, tomorrow was a bad day, whatever it may be. It's let's try to make this one score that, you know what, for the next 3 months, if things don't go great, it's not the end of the world because we're way ahead anyway.
Yeah, I like that. I would just add that if you're talking about the kind of horses you mentioned, like horses that are 8 or 10 to 1, you think are should be priced lower. You can make pretty good scores even just betting to win or doubles exactas too. You don't necessarily have to get into the extreme exotic bets. You could certainly really make a score if you do there, but probably the wise way to approach those is to play both, right? So if you're right about that particular horse, you don't have to be right about everything else. You can still make a good score, and then if you're right, kind of get lucky and can fill in the blanks in a more exotic play, then you can, really make a score. That might be the best approach with those kinds of horses because, it's always would be depressing to be right about your 10 to 1 shot and then not cash a ticket, right? So you want to be careful about that.
Yeah, and I've had instances to be totally transparent where, my preference would be to press up pick threes, and I'll use a few backups and we'll get into it as we kind of talk about the sequence into the horse that I like. And I've screwed that up where you get bounced in the first leg. And rather than chase saying, okay, well, let's come right back with the double, you kind of lick your wounds, take your medicine and say, okay, well, now instead we're just going to make a win bet on that horse in the payoff leg that I like. Yes, you have effectively slashed your price, but I still think the bigger picture was, look, I had what I thought was a good opportunity or a good leverage point. I'm going to use that term many, many times. And if it worked out, it would have been way, way for the better. Okay, made a little bit of an error tactically, whatever the case may have been. Now, let's still at least make sure that we come out of here today, if I am right in that payoff leg, a little bit to the good. Maybe it's not that windfall that I was hoping for, but it's still going to put you in a position to be okay for the next little while.
Right. The lever is not quite as long.
Correct.
So you don't get quite as much, power, but you still have a lever you can pull, right?
Yep.
All right. Last thing before we get into the races is I do want to talk a little bit about the betting menu at the track, Saratoga / NYRA. They're the takeout rates are pretty good at NYRA, and they have the penny breakage, which is great. But the big thing about Saratoga this summer is just the CAW teams are throttled in every single pool. The only track that's doing that, and that just the effective takeout really drops when they throttle the CAWs. So the pools are much more player friendly at Saratoga than anywhere else. So you combine that with the good racing, and like I said, it's kind of silly to be betting into pools at other tracks where their CAWs are not throttled. You're going to get lower payouts. You're going to get T.O. Elvis with these late odds changes. I mean, it really makes sense to shift some or all of your handle towards Saratoga. It's going to improve your results. But for me, what I'm really trying to push people a little bit is to think big picture. The racing product continues to deteriorate over time, and this is our chance to show that we can change and that we will gravitate towards tracks that manage the CAWs. And so if we can shift our handle and the other tracks see this and their handle goes down a little and Saratoga's goes up, then maybe they'll follow suit. But if we don't, then it'll never happen. And this is maybe our last opportunity to send that signal. So I really think it's an important time for players. It's not too late. It's in your own best interest. You're not really sacrificing anything. So I really encourage you, give Saratoga a try at least, because I think it's important that we send that signal as collectively as horse players. And if you want to know more about takeout because it does vary widely from track to track and even across pools at tracks. At my website, betwiththebestmedia.com, I have a link to a spreadsheet I keep up that gives you information about takeout and which tracks are throttling CAWs and which aren't. So I encourage you to go out there to betwiththebestmedia.com. Take a look at that. Be a smarter consumer of bets as a horse player. It will improve your results. And of course, in my book, I go into a lot of detail about how to better improve and optimize your play in this era of the CAW teams. So again, you can get the book. But I'll end it there, and we'll get to the races. And the races we're going to cover are races 5 through 9. It's sort of a middle pick 5. It includes 4 graded stakes races. The first of which is the 5th race, the Grade 1 Sanford Stakes, 6 furlongs for 2-year-olds on the dirt. What you'd expect, a bunch of promising young 2-year-olds. And we don't have a heavy favorite. I'll say that based on some stuff I've read from DRF, the 1-horse Wagley, the filly, Wesley Ward filly, it will scratch, and the 7-horse Ashcroft Lane, the Falcone Colt, they are going to scratch. So field of 7. There is no strong standout favorite. The booked is 3-1 the morning line. What are you thinking about on this race, Matt?
Yeah, I think the defection of Wagley is an important one. I suppose Ashcroft Lane as well, but Wagley especially so, just because she looked very good in those first 2 starts. Booked as the favorite doesn't really do a heck of a lot for me, and it's not a knock against the horse. I thought he was professional in that win at Saratoga. I didn't really have any issue there. It was just when you kind of compare his likelihood of winning versus what I think his off odds are probably going to be. My guess is he comes into that sort of, 9-5, 8-5 range, and I just don't think he's got that much of an edge on the rest of this field. And I don't know what your overall opinion is with these 2-year-old races, Chris, but for me, so often it is just so much about pace. And I understand some folks can look at it and say, well, if you get a barbecue early on, they're kind of speed crazy runoffs. They're all going to tire each other out and it'll fall apart. I think with the defection of Wagley and Ashcroft Lane, at least in my opinion, the pace doesn't look overly swift. I think you've got 2 proper speeds, maybe 3 if you wanted to add Regents Park. But I looked at the 4 pocket listing and the 9 Razazi as the 2 speeds in this race. I have a sneaking suspicion this pocket listing is going to be the one that makes the lead for Doug O'Neill coming in from California. He broke like a rocket ship on debut, and apparently he was just, Frank Miramati even mentioned it in the race call, the worst kept secret on the backside at Santa Anita at that time when he debuted. He put 2 on the field in the blink of an eye, and you'll see the short comment says green upper and coasted. He's extremely green. He's looking around. His ears are up. He was very goofy with the lead change. He actually almost bounced off the inner rail at one point, but he was 100 clear of everyone. It's not to say that he's going to be able to replicate that again, but the fact that they're willing to ship him to Saratoga on, call it 3 weeks off of that kind of a debut, I think probably speaks volumes of his ability. And as far as Razazi goes, not only did he win on debut, but he won by 7 for Antonio Sano. If you take a look at the numbers, Sano over the past 5 years with first-time starters is 10 for 202. That's 5%. So not only does he not do this, but when they do this, they don't win by 100. I think they're both quite talented. Those would be the 2 horses that I would probably lean into, the 4 pocket listing, the 9 Razazi, with the idea that it may end up just being a merry-go-round. And if I wanted somebody from off of it, while I've mentioned I respect booked, I'd probably look at Goodbye to Romance for Jenna Antonucci. I thought the debut was good, kind of out in the clear throughout, never looked like a loser at any point. There is a bit of pedigree. The complexities have done okay so far. The second dam was a winner of the La Brea back when she was out on the track. So she would be my kind of he would be my off the pace runner. But I wanted the speeds in here. I'd go 4 and 9 in here. And best of all, I don't think either of them are going to be the favorites.
So would you play either of those 2 to what price? As a win bet, is there a bet you would make? And if so, what price would you need on either the 4 or the 9?
I don't think I'd want either of them less than sort of that 9-2, 5-1 range, just simply because there is still the unknown. I mentioned with pocket listing, he's extremely green. it shouldn't just be assumed that you're going to get a more professional version of him this time around. He may still be a rocket ship, but if he gets into a battle with some more seasoned or more professional runners, at least let's put it that way, he could easily spit the bit and pack it in. Razazi, he's taking on much better company than what he saw down in South Florida there on debut. So I wouldn't want to go too short with either of them. But at least the way that I'm hopeful and the way that I'm seeing it is I do think Booked ends up going off as a fairly clear favorite in that sort of 8-5, 9-5 range. Maybe you get a little bit of a shifting and juggling with some of these odds with those two horses, the 1 and the 7 coming out. But yeah, I would say probably right around 5-1 for each of them. And if you got it on both, I'm not somebody that's opposed to making multiple win bets. I know, again, you're effectively taking half the number that you'd be getting on one of them. But if you're getting a fair price on both of them together, I don't have a problem taking them and saying, look, if I can get 2.5-1, 3-1 combined on the two of them, I'll make that win bet every day.
Or even an exacta box, right? But with the
Yeah.
two. Yeah, and it seems like one of those two will probably go off at that price. Probably one of them will be lower. Right now, if you go off the morning line and the connections, probably it would be the 4. That would be the shorter of the two. So I'm thinking the 9 horse, you probably will get that price. I do have just a few comments on what you had said. Yeah, Pocket Listing does seem like just a really, really quick horse, right? Just the natural speed is there, and like you said, really, really green, almost propped in the stretch in that debut, and then was getting out really bad late. So yeah, there seems like there's a lot of talent, a lot of upside there, but you're not sure what you're going to get. These connections do this a lot. They'll take shots with their horses, ship them around, put them in tough spots. So I wouldn't put quite as much weight behind the fact they decide to ship this horse. It's not like Shug McGahee doing it or something. O'Neill and Redham, they'll take shots anywhere. And a lot of times, they don't pay out, but sometimes they do. And then, this horse was facing state-bred horses in that debut, so it crushed them, and it is really quick. But, just like you said with Razazi, hasn't really faced any quality yet, so we got to wait and see what happens. But I agree with you. Those two are the speed horses, and this kind of race, speed's pretty important, so I wouldn't talk you out of that at all. The only thing I would add to what you said is, Jack's Golden Goal, the 6 horse, was the horse who finished second to Booked. And just watching that race, he was a little green. And once he got rolling, it looked to me like if they had gone much more than 5.5 furlongs, he was going to run past Booked, who's going to be the favorite in here. So I like the fact they're taking a shot, even though he's still a maiden, eligible for, a maiden race. I think, he could be the one sitting off that if the speed horses don't hold up, he would be the one to go by. And he might get overlooked given that he was beaten by a couple lengths by the favorite. He's a maiden, the connections aren't the type that grab money. He gets a pretty positive rider switch and blinkers go on, which is a good move for this barn. So to me, there's a lot to like in the 6 horse. He might get a little overlooked. So that would be the one horse that might get me interested in playing this race. If I were to get that 8-1 or higher on the 6 Jack's Golden Goal, that might get me interested in playing it. But I don't disagree with anything you said about the 4 and the 9. And I agree with you, the 2, like I said, if even just straight, even at the same price, I think I would like Jack's Golden Goal in here over Booked, given that Booked is going to have to, either, try to run past those much quicker horses than it had last time and then hold off. I don't see that horse holding off Jack's Golden Goal late. So hopefully, maybe the race could set up a little bit for him. But like you said, these 2-year-old races at 6 furlongs don't typically fall apart. And, that would bode well for the speed horses.
That was kind of my thought. I've just hit a point in my horse playing career that, sometimes you will get a destructive pace where it does come apart. But I just think more often than not, especially with these 2-year-olds, the inexperienced ones, the fastest ones often can carry on with it unless they just aren't bred to get 6 furlongs or whatever the distance is. And I don't really think that's going to be the case for either of the two speeds in here. So I'll lean on those two. As far as Jack's Golden Goal goes, and the last thing I'll add, I agree with you. I like the way that he was finishing at the end. And I'm reading a little bit between the lines. I don't even know if there is a tape out there for that workout on June 23rd at Belmont over the training track. But you see the equipment change and you see a sudden, pretty stark difference in his workout times. It is a bit of projecting and conjecture. I don't know for certain. But when you see an uptick like that, my guess is that workout came with the equipment. I like to see that sort of thing. So even if you just told me it was as square as the morning line odds, 3-1 versus 8-1, I would much rather the 6 than the 2.
Yeah, and the barn does well when they go blinkers on in the second start. It's a move that they like to make. So you put all that together and you watch his race where he was kind of green and looked like blinkers might improve him. He might be sitting a little closer, which like we all agree, both of us agree that you probably don't want to get too far back in these kind of races. He might be the surprise package, as they used to say in the little comments in the DRF. So, that to me, he's the interesting horse in here. So
agreed.
All right. Anything else on that one before we move on to the next?
No, good for me with the Sanford.
All right, let's go to the 6th. This is the only non-stakes race. It's a humdinger, big field. 5.5 furlongs on the turf for state-bred 3-year-olds and up. This one's wide open. No strong favorite in here. Van Vollenhoven is the tepid 7-2 morning line favorite. What are you thinking here?
I thought this race was not impossible, but pretty darn close to it. I just, the thing of it is, you need to decide, at least in my opinion, the way that I go about these races, you need to decide what you think of that allowance race on June 7th at Saratoga, where, I don't know, 4 or 5 of them are coming out of it. And if you went back and watched the tape, I thought the winner, New York Scrappy, was clearly the best in there. You take him out of it, the rest of the group, I feel like if you ran the race 100 times, you might get 100 different versions of how they came in. I think a lot of people are going to look to right in the 5 and say, well, if he doesn't leap at the start, then he's probably a lot closer. Maybe he's involved. And maybe the move to Pratt makes the difference. But I think a lot of people are going to have that opinion. And he's 6-1 on the line. If he comes down from there, he doesn't really seem to offer any value, in my opinion. The problem is, if it's not him, it could be any of them coming out of there. So the tough thing, if we're talking about it from a sequence standpoint, whether it's the second leg of that pick 5 or this is the kickoff leg of the pick 6, I simply don't have an opinion. So it almost eliminates this sequence for me from being serious about it, because I'd probably need to buy it to have any confidence that I'd get through it, or I'd be taking too many horses and I'd be making it cost prohibitive. I don't want to sit there and just add horses for the sake of adding them, but I don't have an opinion. So you're kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't. The only horse, if I were sitting here and let's just say it were a contest, or, you absolutely told me I needed to make a pick and make a bet in here based on the morning line odds, maybe I would give Punto 40, the one horse, a little bit of a look. First time going out for Linda Rice's barn, has shown big speed in the 4 starts out west in Southern California for the Mullins barn. Doug O'Neill had this runner to start and seemingly never was able to sustain it. And that would be an obvious concern here. But as the speed of the speed, or what I think should be the speed of the speed, it wouldn't be the first time that a horse got brave out there on the front end sprinting on grass. It never stopped. But again, I would need probably every bit of that 10-1 to have any interest. And I don't know that you're going to get that just given the connections and the way Linda's gone this year. So I hate to say this, it's a very uninteresting listen, but I don't have an opinion in this race. I couldn't make heads or tails of it.
Yeah, and that's okay. One of the things to talk about on this show and in the book is it's okay to pass a race. In fact, if you're not passing races, you're probably leaking equity, right? There's no way you can have a good opinion in every race, at least not nowadays, as tough as the pools are. So there's nothing wrong with that. And I kind of agree that problem with Punto Forte is I think people are going to see the speed and they're going to see the, switch to Linda Rice, and I don't think you're going to get a price. If the horse is live, I don't think it's the kind of horse I can't play, because if it's live, I think the price is going to be much lower. And if it's not, it's not getting bet, then I start worrying that
Right.
it's not live. So I couldn't play that. And I agree it's kind of wide open, but I when it's a wide open like this, if there's a horse I can get that I think is as likely to win as anybody at 15 or 20 to 1, that I get kind of interested in. Even in the horizontals, I'll just play the long shots. And, if I really think it's that wide open, then I shouldn't be playing any of the favorites and, play a few of the shots. I don't have to play a bunch of them, but, you don't have to bet a whole lot into it. But, I could see using a couple of them that I'd consider would be like the 6-horse Stormy Birthday. This horse, it's not a win machine, but none of these are. But it certainly runs some good races in the past, and it needed that last race off the layoff and second off the layoff. It could get completely ignored, and it was 3 to 1 in that race. It's 15 to 1 on the morning line in here. If you actually got 15 to 1, I could get interested on that horse. Maybe the horse right outside of it, Mozambique. Horse has never been on the turf, but there's nothing in the breeding that says it couldn't take to the turf, and its dirt races look pretty good. But I just like the fact that it's doing something different. It might just be in there hoping that they take off, because of the weather. So it may be a scratch, but that's the way I think about these kind of races. Are there some really big prices that maybe you could take a look at possibly playing, not because they're great, but because they're probably as likely to win as anybody else. And so a horse like the 6 Stormy Birthday in particular is one. Also maybe the 10 horse Delello, another one, second off the layoff, probably needed that last race, and now goes second off the layoff. Those are the kind of horses I look for in here. But I kind of agree with you. There's nobody I like enough to really get excited about playing the race. So probably the only way I would be betting it is to, if I decide there's a horizontal bet that includes this race, and then, like you said, I don't want to be spreading too much. I'll probably just pick some of the long shots and kind of hope that I get lucky. But I'd only do that if I really like some of the other legs and I really want to play a horizontal.
I was going to say it all depends on what you think of the rest of a sequence, right? It's one thing to say you want to do X, Y, and Z, or when I've heard people bring up the all button, right, and using every horse. In my head, at that point, let's just use this race as the example. If you're buying it, why are we using the short numbers? Because you clearly don't like them all that much, and all you would be doing is just eating into whatever equity you would have in the sequence by using 9 other ones. So
Exactly.
to your point, maybe you only pick 3 of them. Heck, maybe you pick 5 or 6 of the bigger numbers, and you say, if I am really hell bent on playing this sequence, or maybe there's other stuff in there that you like, but this is a race in the sequence that you don't really love the favorites. Take a bunch of the double-digit horses and say, look, call it a lottery ticket if you will. I think that's probably being a little bit uncharitable, but the idea is I'm basically zagging when everybody else is zigging. I don't want to just hit this thing just to hit it. And that goes back to my original point of trying to make a score. Yes, maybe you get a little bit of a thrill because you're still alive because you used all of them. But big picture, that's a quick way to just keep hemorrhaging money. I'd rather split that down the middle, give me all the big numbers, and maybe I am right. Maybe we get lucky in this spot, and I can still connect on the rest of the sequence. And the next thing you know, this has gone from a pretty good return to a 5-figure, if not greater.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's actually, it is you do have an opinion. Your opinion is the favorites are not any more likely to win than the long shot. So if that's
Correct.
your opinion, then that's one of the things I stress in the book is you should always make bets that are consistent with your opinion. So if that's your opinion, it makes no sense at all to be including those favorites in your bets because you're saying they're all big underlays. They're not any more likely to win. This one's 3 to 1. It's not any more likely to win than this horse that's 15 or 20 to 1. So why would I be including the 3 to 1 shot? Doesn't make any sense. So you actually do have an opinion. It's a hard one to bet unless you really have strong opinions in other legs. And that's why, it's just like you can pass a race, you can pass a bet. You don't have to play every pick 5 or every pick 4 or every pick 3, whatever your favorite bet is. And you can pass them if you don't like the sequence, and you should if you don't like the sequence. And that's an important part. And then the other thing I'll just say in the book, what I have like called the 10 Commandments of horse players, and one of those is thou shall never use the L button. So.
Yeah. No, I think that's the right way to go about it. And I think another thing, I didn't price this race out entirely, but my hunch would be I don't think I'd have a horse any shorter than 5-1, maybe even 6-1. So that's somewhere between that sort of 17%, 14% likelihood of winning. And you would think at least four of these horses are going to be shorter than that. So if you just wanted to kind of separate it that way, put out a value line or a likeliness of winning for the entirety of the field. And then the horses that you just don't think are going to be that high, just wipe them out. Don't use them. Use everyone else.
Yeah, or there may be a few you can eliminate. You say this horse has no chance, but
right.
There's going to be some that you think have a chance, and that based on if you really have the opinion that we've talked about, where we don't think any of the favorites are significantly better than the long shots, then you've got a handful of long shots that you can consider betting. And if you like playing horizontals, then you could include them in horizontal. If you're a exact or try better, maybe you box those horses. There are other ways you could play it. So there are ways to play this opinion, but probably the wrong way to play it is to play a horse to win, because when you're playing a horse to win that you think has less than 12%, 15% chance to winning, you're in for a lot of long losing streaks if you're betting those horses consistently. So, and you're not getting the giant payouts when they do come in. So, that's probably not the way to bet a race like this. This isn't probably a win bet race, but if you can really, toss, just decide you're not going to play the favorites, none of them stand out. There's a few horses you can toss, and you're left with, 2, 3, or 4 horses that are all, prices. You can probably do something with that, depending on your, maybe just within that race. If it's a big field, you could get big payouts in exactas and tries if you've got all the favorites out, and or in horizontals, like you said, if you have other opinions. That's only if you have stronger opinions than some of the other legs. So one of the things I talk about in the book is to think about betting as much as you think about the analysis of the race. It's not over once you done your who you think are the most likely winners, or even if after you've made an odds line, you got to figure out what you're going to do with it, right? And that's just as important as doing that upfront analysis.
I think the biggest mistake I've made, and I would say most horse players make, is you spend an inordinate amount of time assessing the race and not nearly enough time assessing how to bet the race. And in reality, you should probably, I'm making it up, say it's 80-20. It should be 80-20 the other way, because there's only so much you can do. The race is going to be run one time. I can go through and try to figure out from a probability standpoint how likely I think this horse is to win if they ran it 100 times. But the fact is, it's going to happen once. So in that one instance, let me take a look and see what the tote is telling me and is offering me, and spend more time constructing a bet than actually trying to dissect how the race is going to be run. And again, I know I'm guilty of it. I have been from day one, and I know a lot of players are. We should probably spend a heck of a lot more time constructing as opposed to dissecting the race.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a sliding scale. If you're talking about a simple bet like a win bet, then, if you found a horse you like and you think if I get this price or better, I'm going to play it, that's maybe you don't need to think beyond that. But if you start betting pick fives or superfectas or trifectas, or you're trying to figure out which pool you want to play, and you're considering some of the more exotic pools, then I absolutely agree. The more complex the wager, the more time you need to spend thinking about the betting, than the more simple types of bets. So certainly agree with you that, and that most players probably don't allow or give that adequate time, and probably that's where they make the most mistakes. And when they have the biggest room for improvement is on that betting side, and that's why. On the Bet with the Best podcast and in my book, I spend so much time on the betting, because I think most players, even lifelong players that are pretty good handicappers, probably have room to improve on the betting side.
Yeah, and it's one thing, I don't know how you feel about this. I've never bought into the people that say, oh, well, the people that bring up the idea that I'm a good handicapper and a bad bettor, they're full of it. They're just bad all around. I don't believe that. I do think there is a wild difference between the two. You can be a brilliant sort of assessor of a race, but if you can't actually connect the dots, that's a skill in and of itself that I personally think, the people that just say one is the same as the other, I think you're off base. I think they are two wildly different skills, and both of them are important. But I do think some people can have strengths and weaknesses on either side.
Absolutely. And in my book, I have what I call the horse player maturity map, and it really has two main dimensions. One is your skill and ability as, to analyze races or handicap races, and the other is your skill and ability as a gambler and to make bets. And to be a really good horse player, you have to be skilled at both. And the betting side, actually, if anything, kind of is treated almost as a pejorative, that betting is kind of a degenerate activity when really, betting is, in that gambler's mindset, is just essential to being a good horse player, but it's pretty essential to being successful at just about anything. You have to understand, risk and how to manage risk and assess, the costs and benefits and make decisions. Looking for a place where you think you have an edge, where you see something other people don't see. That's how people become successful in anything. And it's no different as a horse player. So, that gambling side of it is really, really important. And in most skill-based gambling games, people realize that, poker players understand that. But horse players, for some reason, there's a lot of us who just think about the handicapping and just really downplay the betting side, and which is a big mistake if you're trying to make a long-term profit, or at least lose less long-term.
Yeah, and that's why I circle back to the idea that the picks, I think, are fairly antiquated. I just think that's the wrong way to go about looking at it, because a pick doesn't put any money in your pocket.
That's right. It could pick your pocket, in fact.
That's it.
All right. Okay. So for some of the listeners are probably boring and they want to know who we like in the seventh race. So let's move on to the seventh race. But you can tell, I really think this betting stuff's important and I like to talk about it. And so I'm sorry if I bored some of the listeners. We'll move on to the seventh race. It's the Grade 1 Belmont Oaks at 1.125 on the turf for 3-year-old fillies. This one, we have a favorite that I think will kind of stands out a little bit in the 8, Abashiri. The connections are pretty good, Appleby and Buick. The form's pretty good, been running against the best 3-year-old fillies in the world on the turf. Is Abashiri a favorite you're going to lean on, or one you're going to try to beat?
No, she would definitely be one to lean on. If you're playing the multis, I think you would be making an error in just trying to beat her for the sake of trying to beat her. I think she's too good. You talk about the form. The fact that she's run into Precise and True Love, who are two of the best over in Europe right now. They're both trained by Aidan O'Brien, to no surprise. And she hasn't been embarrassed in either the English or the Irish Guineas so far to start her season. So I look, she's the likeliest winner in here. I didn't go her direction, and I won't bet her, just simply because there is another filly in here that I don't think she's miles behind her. She certainly needs to improve, but I think she's on that upward trajectory, and I'm going to get a much more favorable price, at least the way that I've kind of gone through the race. The 6 fits right for Chad Brown. I don't know how you feel this time of year, especially. I want to see horses that are continuing to take steps forward, as opposed to the ones that, yes, maybe they've won a few races, but I look at their form and I watch their tape and I go, I don't know if you've either plateaued or maybe you're starting to actually tail off a little bit. I don't get that impression with Fitzwright. I think she is slowly but surely putting it all together, and I like that Chad has kind of taken his time and given her bit by bit, step by step, that move up the ladder. And now here we are into Grade 1 company on the heels of what I thought was a very professional win in the Wonder again. I never thought she looked like much of a loser. I thought she beat a decent horse in Lion Lake. She was 3-1 that day in a field of 7. You get a much bigger fielded here with more well-known names, including some European representation. I think the morning line's pretty darn good. I think she's probably in that 6 or 7-1 range. And to me, she's at least that likely to win the race. So this is an instance where, not only from a multi standpoint, but on the win end, I look forward to hopefully being able to get down on the 6 fits right.
Yeah, you don't often get a price on a Chad Brown, unless he's got 3 horses in the race and you're getting the other Chad. This case, it would be the other Chad. He's got 2, but you make an interesting case. You certainly want horses that are improving. I'm not sure that horse is capable of beating Abashiri if she runs, but there are questions, right? She is shipping across to a new continent, but certainly the connections. I've had a lot of success shipping to the U.S. before. Both the rider, who's probably, if not the best rider on turf in the world, one of the top few, and the trainer's had a lot of success over here. He hasn't been lights out like he was for a while there, but he certainly knows what he's doing. So I kind of get that. What sort of price would you be looking for? What would make that Fitz Right playable for you on the morning line at 6-1? Is that a playable price, or do you need more than that?
No, 6 is good to me. I'd probably even go as low as 5-1, 9-2, 5-1. So you're getting into that 18, 17% kind of number. If they run the race 100 times, I think she wins right around that, not just shy of 20. And I agree. I mean, again, can't overstate it. Abashiri is strictly the horse to beat in here. There's really no 2 ways around it. I respect a lot of other fillies in this race. I think it's a good group. But I think going back to the idea of wanting horses on the come up as opposed to the ones that, yes, they can win, but I don't know that they're necessarily getting better. I see so many common running lines. Just Aloof has taken on a number of the same opponents. Time to Dream has done the same. You look at Storms Awake. You look at Ultimate Love. I just don't think she's gotten much better appreciably. And then Imagination the Lady, who's done very little wrong. But they're all kind of running against one another. And those are almost the races or the groups of horses that to me become harder to fully dissect and diagnose, because maybe they are the cream of the crop and they're all just the best of the best. Or have they kind of taken turns beating one another because they're not inherently the best of the best? And now you've got some fillies that are on the come up, or you've got a monster from Europe coming over here who's just clearly better.
Yeah, I agree. A couple things I would add, because I don't disagree with anything you said. For me, you kind of dismissed Ultimate Love, but that's the kind of horse I like. You asked about what kind of horses I like in this kind of race. Well, I'm always looking for horses that are maybe sitting on a lifetime best race. And, she was clearly the best of this bunch as a 2-year-old, and she's only had the 1 start. She didn't win, but I mean, it was off the layoff, and she rallied late. Another jump or 2, she would have won the comeback effort. To me, it was fine as a comeback race. And now she gets the 2nd start off the layoff. Maybe she hasn't improved. I just don't think you can tell if she hasn't improved yet as a 3-year-old. She only had the 1 start. She probably wasn't 100% fit. Now, she runs back to that race again here, then I agree with you. But here's where I think you're going to see that improvement. And if she improves over her 2-year-old form, she's the best U.S. horse for sure. I don't know if she's good enough to beat Abashiri, but if she improves enough, she might be. So that's the one I'm interested in. And if it really get 10-1, which is the morning line on her, that's the one I'd be interested in playing. And, I would definitely be saving with Abashiri, and in horizontals, I would lean more on Abashiri than Ultimate Love. But those 2, I'm probably the most interested in here. And the other one would be the other foreign shipper, Kensington Lane, who, she's not as good as Abashiri. She's coming out of the race where Abashiri beat her by, quite a bit. But she had some, she didn't have the best of trips in there, I didn't think. She'll be forward, and she, may take to the American racing. She has some other, she's kind of been in and out from a consistency standpoint, but her best races have been pretty good. That Group 3 one that she ran and won in Ireland was pretty good. So that horse, more underneath, I don't think that horse is going to beat Abashiri. But if that were to be 10-1, I could start playing some exactas and tries with Abashiri on top of those 2. But Ultimate Love is the kind of horse I always like to play. If I can get a price on a horse who, with any improvement off its 2-year-old form, can win, or at least best the rest of the U.S. horses, that's the horse I want. And I'm willing to say that first race was her tightener. And this is where you're going to find out if she's improved any or not. And if she has, she could be much better than the rest of the U.S. horses, I think. So that's the one I'm interested in, especially if I get 10-1. That'd be the 9 Ultimate Love. So really it's 8, 9 primarily for me in here.
Yeah, that was my only question with her, is that she's just always been bet in her entire career. And maybe she does go off at a big number. I mean, she was the favorite in the Breeders' Cup last year over a number of European runners. So there was just a part of me that didn't fully buy into the idea of 10-1. But I guess with Abashiri's presence, there's your favorite, no doubt about it. You build off of that. And maybe there are enough other fillies in here, Imagination the Lady being one of them, that will take more money. And maybe you do get that kind of a price on Ultimate Love. I'm always gun shy. I feel like I've seen this happen before, to me anyway, where, I think the same thing. I see a morning line, I go, okay, this is finally the time we're going to get a playable price. And without fail, that, she opens up at 5-1. And suddenly I'm thinking, well, I wanted 8 or 9 or 10, not half of that. And maybe today is or Saturday's the day. I wasn't sure how they were going to approach her.
Yeah, but I think at worst case, she'll be about the same price as 4 or 5 other U.S. horses. So,
sure.
And to me, she's clearly more likely to win than any of those. That's just the way I assess this. Her 2-year-old form's just good enough to probably, with any improvement at all, I think she's going to be better than any of the U.S. horses. So I think she's significantly above those. So even in the exacta underneath Abashiri, if I don't get a win price that I can play, I think she's still value underneath Abashiri, because I think she's much better than the other U.S. horses. Now, I could be wrong. It's not often that these turf routers don't improve some from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4 even, especially the colts. So, but you never know. But her comeback effort didn't do anything. To me, that was what I want. If she had run really well, then I know she'd be no price. But she ran just well enough to make it look like, she needed the race. And now this is where you're going to get that improvement over her 2-year-old efforts. And you'll get a little better price because of it. And these are the kind of horses I love to play. And people listen to this podcast know that. I call it the golden pattern. And I think she sports that pattern, and that's what makes her playable. But she may not be 10-1. I wouldn't be surprised if they got a bit down. And, so I may not bet her to win, but I would probably be playing her in exactas underneath Abashiri, but probably some on top. And so if I'm right, maybe she's a little better. She really improves. But, you're right. It does seem like that morning line may be a little high. Even David Aragon is not perfect on these, because she has been favored in all of her previous starts, including the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. That was a little bit the favorite, I think, was actually Precise, I think, was who was going to be the favorite. Had to scratch or something. So
yeah, she got sick.
Yeah, I got sick. So that was, but still, of the ones who ran, they better down. Well, partly because she was so dominant in her early races. That she was a dominant 2-year-old. And just because she didn't win in her comeback effort doesn't tell me that she's not going to be dominant at 3 too. Just means maybe she needed the race. So we'll see.
Totally. And to be fair, she'd been gone for a while, right? I mean, that
right.
return was, call it 6 months. She had every right to need that. And now the fact that they come here to a grade 1 and that you're going to get some big hitters, that probably speaks volumes about what they think of her and where she stacks up. So don't get me wrong. I think she's very talented. I was just wondering if the price would match it if she had improved. Like you say, we'll find out on Saturday.
Yeah. And it's always all about the price. And you're always looking for value. Okay, anything else on that one before we get to the next in the sequence? That's the 8th race, the Grade 2 Suburban Stakes. This was 1.25 miles on the dirt. We talked about not having a whole lot of 1.25 miles graded stakes on the dirt for 3-year-olds and up. We have one here. Pretty good field, pretty competitive field. The favorite is Antiquarian, stretching out from start in the Met Mile, but has run well at this distance before. It's 3-1 on the morning line. Probably will get bet down below that, I'm guessing. But what do you think of Antiquarian? What do you think of this race?
I'm a fan of Antiquarian. I think he's a good little horse. I don't know that he is of the elite of the elite. Full disclosure, I actually bet him in the Breeders' Cup last year in the Classic because he was going to be just a giant number, and he was coming off of a giant fig. And I said, I don't really love any of the other ones. I respect them all, but I didn't think any of them offered a great price. And I said, with a 108 buyer and I believe he had a -2 or a -1 in his back pocket on Thoroughgraph, I said, I'm happy to take a shot. And I knew I was done about a half mile into the race. He just wasn't keeping up. So draw a line through that. He's gone for some time, so maybe something went wrong anyway. And then in the Met, that 1.5 turns at Saratoga is very awkward. Some horses handle it, others don't. I'm drawing a line through that race as well. I don't much care about it. I think he's a good horse. I don't want him at the kind of price that he's going to be on Saturday. I think he's interesting when he is in that sort of 6, 7, 8, 10-1 range. When he's vying for favoritism, I think you can kind of take a shot against him. So in a multi, depending on what are the prices you like along the way, I'm not way against him. But on the win end, I just don't necessarily think he's going to offer what I would deem fair value. The horse that I caution, well, I'll put it two ways. I've never been a fan of Hit Show, but I think he's actually a decent horse. And I know that sounds stupid because he's won the Dubai World Cup. He must be a decent horse. But I think a lot of people have talked about him in a way that he just has never been an elite horse. He's probably just a good grade 2 or grade 3 type. But I did think his run at the fairgrounds on Valentine's Day was much better than it looks. I know the horses that he beat weren't all that as far as great shakes are concerned, but he was way against the bias. That was a speed and inside day, and he was coming from off of it and widest, and he was able to grind away. The World Cup, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And then in the Blame, I think he's better at 1.25 miles, and I just kind of feel like he probably needed that one off the layoff, and he didn't have the cleanest trip. So I could see Hit Show running quite well in here, depending on his price. But the one that I was most interested in is Phileas Fogg. And I think a lot of people probably still look at him and they think, wow, well, he's just sort of, one of those sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't types. But if you ignore those 2 one-turn races at Aqueduct, those 2-mile races, all of his 1.1 miles or greater races for the better part of a year and a half have all been really good. And if you're just looking at it, trying to kind of compare and contrast the likelihood of winning versus the likely off odds, I kind of think he's going, I don't know if he's 8-1, but if he's 6-1, I still think he's probably an overlay in a race like this. So if I needed to make a bet on the win end, I'd go to Phileas Fogg.
That's interesting. What are you thinking from a pace perspective on this race?
So the tough thing becomes Forged Steel, because to me, his game has gone to a new level when they've just cut him loose and gone to the front. Pratt's aboard. I think they're probably going to be fairly aggressive with him. Phileas Fogg is going to be up there. There's no doubt about it. I don't know if he's going to duel on the front end or he's going to be content to let the inside horse go and then sit just off of him. And then beyond that, maybe it's Original Sin who shows a little bit of pace. But to me, it's those two. It's going to be some combination of 2-6-6-2 by the time they get into the clubhouse turn. If the 2 relinquishes the lead to the 6, I think Phileas Fogg is extremely dangerous. Maybe he's a little bit harder to fully trust if he's got to sit off of the 2 horse, that being Forged Steel, and go and get him and then hold off the closers. But I kind of see it being those 2 horses, and depending on what Pratt wants to do, if they let the 6 go, I think the 6 can get real brave.
Yeah, I agree, but I'll throw a couple things that might give you a little bit of a different perspective on the pace. The outside horse Obstacle, the Brazilian horse, that horse is a need to lead type. And this horse is pretty quick. I mean, he ran some, I watched some of the replays of his races. There's some talent there, but he's going to be forward. Probably from that post they'll have to send. And he's quick. I think he's probably fast enough, especially going 1.25 miles, to push these horses. And then I think Class Assist on the rail for Pletcher probably will get sent. The horse likes to be forward. It's on the rail. He's got, Fletcher's got the favorite. He probably doesn't want Antiquarian to let like Phileas Fogg get loose like he did last year in this race where he won, where he beat Antiquarian. So I'm thinking this could be a pretty hot pace for a mile and a quarter. If you've got, the 1, the 2, the 11, and the 6 all pushing the lead, for a mile and a quarter race, this could be cook up, I think. So I'm inclined to look for horses to come from off it. I think Antiquarian can certainly do that. I played him in the Met, and I was shocked that he was on the lead. That was just crazy. I just had never ever envisioned him being the lead in that race. So I'm not sure what was going on there, but I would think they'll go back. And this horse relaxes fine in his past races. In fact, sometimes they have to really shake him up to get him going late. A couple of times, he had to re-rally. It's like he falls asleep in the stretch. So I think he'll get a good trip. But I think there's some other closers in here that are interesting. Is there any other horses? Because before I'll jump in with a couple. But is there anything else you had on this one?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a closer, to me, I thought Hit Show would be the one, and I don't even know if
Hit Show. That's right, Hit Show. I forgot.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would fully classify him as a closer. I think he's got enough sort of handiness that he can kind of lay mid pack and come with a run. He would be the off the pace one for me if I needed to find one.
Yeah, he would benefit from a quick pace, I think. Yeah, I've always thought he just like beats up on weak fields whenever he gets any competition. He's not that good. He's been like so soft spotted, but he did get that one big Dubai Cup win, right? That when Mixto ran second, Forever Young didn't fire for whatever reason. But yeah, I just haven't been a fan of his. I can't get behind him because I know he won't be a big price, but he's not. I mean, it won't be real short, but he won't be a big price. The horse that has me interested in the most in here is the 5 Tistastic. This horse, showed some promise as a 3-year-old. Kind of ran a bad race in the slop in the Kentucky Derby, and then they decided they were just going to make him a turf horse. I think maybe they thought that he's a horse that wants, mile and a quarter or more. There's not too many unless, races where you can run in at that distance. So, let's try him on the turf. He never really responded. They persisted a little longer than I would have thought they would, including in his debut this year. But maybe that was just a tightener. But when they finally put him back on the dirt again, he ran a nice race. In fact, his last 2 races on the dirt have both been pretty impressive wins on fast dirt. And I think the mile and a quarter will, that's going to be in his wheelhouse. And he's got all that muddied up form. I think this horse, he could run a really big race in here, and he might get completely overlooked. So I kind of like Tistastic. He's one that needs some pace. I think he's going to get it. And he's going to be a big price. So to me, he's interesting. A couple of other closers I might want to include if I were going to play vertical exotics. If Parchment Party probably wants even longer, but he certainly will benefit from a hot pace. And ever since they stretched him out beyond a mile and an eighth, he's been pretty good. They haven't really tried him at a mile and a quarter, but it seems like that's not going to hurt him too much if there's a fast pace. So I don't think he's going to be a giant price, but he won't be a favorite. And then the other one I'll mention probably will get overbet because of the name on July 4th is the 9 Stars and Stripes, who's just kind of a progressive type that's been steadily improving. Seems like he's one that could take another step forward, and certainly a mile and a quarter will not hurt him at all. He should be able to finish. So that's another one I might include in exotics. But for me, Tistastic is the value, and Antiquarian's probably the horse to beat. Sort of like that last race with Ultimate Love and Abashiri. I kind of like Tistastic and Antiquarian in here.
I've always liked Tistastic. I liked him quite a bit on the road into the Derby. And I always felt like he was kind of an incomplete horse. You'd watch him run, and he kind of ran in starts and stops, and he never really fully focused. And I understood why they went back to the turf with him, because those first two wins of his career came on the turf. Granted, they were both at Kentucky Downs, but I kind of understood it. They felt like maybe they needed to just kind of change it up a bit. And then that last race, you're right, he was good. And you'll note that anytime you get a race where the top two finishers are more than 7 lengths clear of everyone else, yeah, you could use that as a knock against the rest of the field. I typically on dirt look at that as a positive for the horses that got away from everyone. Those when you get big sort of elongated margins, that to me is a positive sign. And the fact that he was able to do that, I still think he's a little bit goofy. He's still got a little bit of looking around in him, but he was much more focused this time around in that race at Churchill at the beginning of May. And if he's finally putting it all together mentally and you get a little bit of pace, I can absolutely see him coming with a run.
Yeah, and Asmussen and Ortiz have been doing pretty good lately in big races. So I would expect a good trip and a good effort. Is he good enough? We don't know, but again, he's the kind where I'm projecting improvement. He's not exactly the golden pattern. He was in his last race. He was what I'd call the golden pattern. I did not play that race. I wasn't playing that day, but I would have been on this horse that day. That's exactly the kind of effort I expect. But there's no reason why he couldn't continue to improve, especially with some added distance in here. He probably has to win, but he might get completely overlooked in this race because there's so many other alternatives to him that I definitely expect at least double-digit odds on that horse.
Yeah, I can't imagine him being too much shorter than that.
But I think the pace could be the big story in here. If I'm right about the 11 and the 1, then this could be a pretty sharp pace for 1.25 miles. Now, could be a sloppy track, could be a speed favoring track. We don't know right now. And certainly if it's a sloppy track, I'm not going to be as excited about Tistastic because he didn't handle the slop at all on Derby Day. So you got to always factor that in. That's why you have to be flexible. But if it's a fast track, I think Tistastic could be an interesting value play to win, and it kind of you could use him in some other bets as well. All right, anything else before we get to the last leg, race 9?
Only other thing I'll throw in there about the Suburban, Forged Steel. I don't want to say I don't believe in him because he didn't beat anything in the Gold Cup. We all kind of understand that. But I also don't want to completely dismiss the fact that, he finished in 25-4. I kind of think of if you're looking at 1.25 mile races and you get that final quarter sub 26, I think you're doing pretty good. He hit the half in 46 and a piece. I thought he ran pretty decent. I'm not telling you he's going to run a 105 here on Saturday, but he's certainly improved fairly dramatically since they got him going long 2 turns on dirt. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, well, actually, Forged Steel, Phileas Fogg, and even the 11 Obstacle, who's the horse I wanted to like. I wish he wasn't, but it's a running style. On all 3 of those, I think are going to hurt each other's chances. So
yeah.
If the other 2 weren't in, if Phileas Fogg and Forged Steel weren't in the race, I'd be all over Obstacle because he has talent and he definitely can get the distance. Or if Obstacle and Phileas Fogg weren't in there, Forged Steel would be a lot more likely to win, I think. But I think with all 3 of those in the race, they're going to compromise each other's chances. So I'm going to try to kind of use that as the starting point for my analysis and look for horses that are going to come from off the pace. Now, if there were to be some scratches, could change the way I look at this race. If they decide to scratch the 11 because it drew the outside and there's a bunch of speed in the race, then all of a sudden Forged Steel and Phileas Fogg, well, if one of them decides to rate, the other one might be really tough, right? So we'll have to wait and see. All right, let's go to the 9th, the Belmont Derby. Grade 1, 1.8 miles on the turf for 3-year-olds. This is a pretty good race for a turf race in the U.S. for 3-year-olds. You got a couple of good foreign shippers. You got some good domestic horses that have run well. The favorite is West End Kid for Will Walden, who just wins races consistently. What are you thinking of? And the three, remember, Mamba probably will buy for favoritism too. That one's Cherie DeVoe, Jose Ortiz, Red Hot combo. So what are you thinking in here?
Well, we can tie it right back to the top when we first began talking about getting into final payoff legs, trying to make a score and separating the likeliest winner or a horse that you do think is a very good win candidate versus a horse that is going to offer, I think, a massive overlay, and you try to leverage them and turn them into, multiple X's what they're going to go off at. I think the 9 title rule is the likeliest winner. And I personally think he's fairly clearly the likeliest winner. I think his form in Europe is very, very good, and not just Europe and Asia as well, because he ran over in the Middle East over the winter. He won the 2000 Guineas over at Meydan at the end of February. He did so very impressively. I thought he looked great that day. Pacific Avenue, who's also in this race from Europe, actually got the jump on him kind of between horses. He's a big gray, and Title Roll was out in the clear the whole time, never really in danger. And when Ryan Moore pushed the button, he just kicked on with it like a good thing. Didn't run great in the Greenham, 2 starts back in Newbury, but then they ran him in the German 2000 Guineas, and he broke real sharp, came to hand, middle of the pack down on the inside. And I thought the length and a quarter margin, I think, is kind of deceiving. I thought he was much the best in there. If you use something like Thorograph, he's fairly standout-ish. If it's not him, it's Pacific Avenue. But I think there's a lot to like about Title Roll. Having said that, if you're looking for me personally, the horse that you could possibly get alive to make that score, that's going to offer multiple X what the off odds are, for me, it's the 4-horse Third Coast. And he's 20-1 on the morning line. Maybe he is 20, just given some of the other names in this race. I doubt it. I think he's probably closer to 15, maybe even a little bit less than that. But this is a horse, if you went back and watched his debut at Tampa, very impressive. Really not much you can knock about him. So much so that he went to Keeneland. He opened up as the favorite, if I remember correctly, and then floated all the way up to just under 5-1. And he was probably a little bit more forward than they wanted to be. Never really had anything at the very end. The fact that they ran him in the Jersey Derby off of that, I think, speaks volumes about what Proctor and company think of him. And another instance where he won fairly comfortably. He's the sort of horse, Chris, that when I'm watching tape, for me, turf is all about just the visual. Obviously, the figures matter, but we've talked about it. Anybody that knows what goes into making figures, you're not going to get a fast rating in a slowly run race as far as the pace is concerned, because your final time is not going to be all that flashy. So if you want to go through and they make projections X, Y, and Z, my point is I'm much more interested in what the horse looks like. And Third Coast doesn't look like the kind of horse that really runs the bends great, but once he levels off, he kicks like a mule. And Mom was marketing mix. She was a Grade 1 winner, finished second in a filly and mare turf in the Breeders' Cup way back when. He's 20-1. I'm not suggesting he is among the 3 or 4 likeliest winners, but if I can get alive to him, and let's say it's a $20 pick 3 or a $30 pick 3, or it's a $5 pick 5, suddenly that 20-1 is going to play a lot closer to put a number on it. It'll be at least have another 0 at the end of it. And that's all I'm looking to do in these kind of instances is get alive to him and say, look, I think there's more here. And if I can be alive for 10 grand, mission accomplished. Whether he wins or loses is kind of inconsequential. I've just put myself in a position to succeed. Whether he gets it done or not, you just kind of let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, well, he's interesting in a couple things. He's pretty well bred by Glen Hill Farms, but he's a gelding. So, they gelded him, and he has, run well. And like you said, you can't always trust the numbers on the turf racing. It's so pace dependent. That's what makes making those turf figures so tricky. And, 2 of his 3 starts have been really good. He did kind of get drubbed by Touch of Fire, who's in this race, in that race at Keeneland. But, like you said, that was only the second race of his life, and he bounced back with a good effort. So maybe that was just a subpar race, and you kind of draw a line through it, and he could turn the tables. And this time, Touch of Fire stuck way outside. Certainly not the only other horse he has to beat. But, you're going to get a massive price on that horse. So I like that thinking a lot. That's the kind of horse I'm always looking for. So what about so this is one where certainly if you weren't live, you could bet him to win. Um, what else are you thinking in here beyond Third Coast? You said you like Title Roll quite a bit as the most likely winner. Could you see maybe exactas with Title Roll maybe, or some kind of vertical bets in here?
Yeah, truth be told, it would probably just be taking the €2, putting them in first, and then Third Coast keying him in second. I do think there's a scenario that the two European horses are just simply better than all the Americans, and that's saying something because I think this is a pretty decent group of American 3-year-olds. I just really do believe in the ability for Title Roll. Simon Crisford's been kind of quoted saying that like this was the plan all along to bring him over here as opposed to try to target something else over in Europe. In Pacific Avenue, is he a superstar for Godolphin? Probably not, but we've seen Charlie Appleby win with, certainly not their A string over here. I think he'll be competitive in a spot like this. I would key those two. I'd probably go 6 and 9 over 4 in second, and you might even be able to talk me into playing tries and just kind of ripping them through. Go, 4 over 6 9, 6 9 over 4, 6 9 over 4, just tearing right throughout. That's a strategy I've used. I haven't done it in many years because I haven't been eligible, but in the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge, one of my sort of go-tos was always finding two horses to kind of wheel throughout and then use many others in that final rung. So, 2 by 2 by, I'm making it up, 5, and then 2 by 5 by 2, and then 5 by 2 by 2, effectively saying I need two of these horses to hit the trifecta and then get lucky with that third rung. And that's I would probably do that in this instance. The only difference would be I would press it up because I'm using fewer horses. So I'd go 6 and 9 and 4. Those would be my three big ones.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on 6 and 9. Um, I, I do think maybe the 6 might be the higher price of the two, and I kind of like him. He did get beat by Title Roll in that one race. There wasn't that much separating. They both kind of moved together. Title Roll out finished him that day, but Pacific Avenue seems to me like a horse that going a little longer will help him. He's going to have, Buick starting from a better post with a better rider. I think is going to be worth a few lengths. And one thing I'll say about him, at that last race he had, they had Jamie Spencer riding him. He's not my favorite rider. Let's just say he's had some horrible rides in the U.S. and this was a great example of that. He not sure what he was doing. He broke slow, which he always does. He's the worst gate rider on the planet. But then he got bounced around and just parked him really wide the entire race, way wide. And he was in against good horses, Gestat and Distant Storm. Those are really good horses. Gestat would be like 1 to 5 in here probably. And he still ran a good third. So I was really impressed with that last race. And now, he gets Buick back. Last 2 times Buick has ridden him, he's had a win and a third by head. So a big rider switch, a very good race. And, to me, he might get a little overlooked. I think Title Roll will probably be bet down. And then there are a couple of good U.S. horses. Remember Mamba and West End Kid. So Pacific Avenue is interesting to me. Now, if I'm wrong and they bet Buick and Appleby, then, if he gets bet down at 3 or 4 to 1, I'm not interested. But if he's at 6 to 1, definitely interested in him. And then the one U.S. horse I'm interested in a lot, I actually bet him last time he ran, and I was really unlucky because he had a horrible trip. He was much the best, and that was the 7 Tiernan Nagao, I think, or Tiernagow, I guess is how you say it. He made his turf debut. I liked the breeding. I thought he would take to the turf, but he got just in a world of trouble early and got shuffled back 6 or 8 lengths, and he was dead last, hopeless spot. But then he came rolling late, and I think he would have beaten Touch of Fire with any kind of trip. He was actually going to be, forward. He ended up way back. And with any kind of trip in here, I think he could run a big race. Is he good enough to beat all the other horses? I don't know, but I know he's a lot better than his last, and that was only his first try on turf. And his dirt races weren't bad. So to me, he is real interesting at a big price. So the 7 horse, and I think he'll be higher than 10-1. I think he will be. You got West End Kids going to take a bunch of money with the connections and the record. You got Remember Mamba is going to take a lot of money with the connections and the record. You got the 2 Good Euros. You got Touch of Fire, who's going to take money with those connections and the record so I gotta believe that 7 horse is going to be much higher than 10-1. And I have a feeling you'll get your 20-1. I think the 7 is going to be closer to the 20-1 than 10-1. So
yeah, I think you and I are both kind of going to live in that 15 to 20 to range on the 4 and the 7, just for that fact. Like you say, not only do you have 2 legitimate Euros, but I'll say it again. I think the 3-year-old boys here, I think this is a pretty good group. I think they may just be running into some really nice Europeans, but I don't have an issue with Touch of Fire other than he gets a little bit keen early on, and I wonder if against better horses if he can afford to do that. I wonder if that bites him at some point. West End Kid has done nothing wrong. I can't sit here and say anything negative about him. Remember Mamba, same deal. He just shows up and runs his race. The others, Botas, I suppose, didn't have the best of trips last time. He kind of got a bit of a shuffle inside the half-mile pole, but I don't know. I thought I heard some people talk about how poor the trip was. I thought things opened up for him pretty well. Maybe between the quarter and the 8th, and he didn't kick enough, but he was also coming off of a long layoff. So I view him as one that should take a step forward, but I'm also not viewing that Pennine Ridge as a disaster trip that I think some people want to paint it as.
Nah, he was kind of ranking. He almost propped on the backside. It was just he was fighting the rider. But I don't really. To me, like you said, the 3 top U.S. horses are all pretty good 3-year-old turf horses for U.S. standards, and then you got the 2 Euros. I'd have a hard time, seeing a horse like Botas or any of the others, except for maybe your Third Coast and the 7 horse being able to break those up. To me, this there's 5 or 6 horses in here. The other 3 or 4 I think would be kind of a stretch. But it has a pretty good feel for this race. I thought.
Very much so. Very much so. And I think it's probably helps a little bit. When this was at Belmont Park, where presumably it'll go back to next year, they'd run it at 1.25 miles. And I think that is still, whether we want to admit it or not, that is a major separating factor for a lot of our horses, even the turf horses. And that's why so many Europeans come over here and just wax all of our horses, because 1.25 miles for them in the U.S. might as well be 1 mile to 1.125 miles for them over there, just given the undulation and the up and down that they run on. So they're just far better conditioned for that sort of thing. So the 1.125 miles here, I think, has actually been a benefit when it's been run at Saratoga or being run there now. When it gets back to Belmont next year, maybe it's a totally different story. But this race, good 3-year-olds here domestically, might be catching a couple of really nice European 3-year-olds.
Yeah. All right. So that kind of wraps it up. What in this sequence, what do you think, and what are the bets that you're most interested or excited about potentially making?
On the win end, I am going to be betting the 6 Fits Right in the Belmont Oaks, acknowledging that Abashiri is the likeliest winner in that spot. In the opening leg of this sort of pick 5, if you will, or the first race that we covered, those 2 speeds that we talked about, Pocket Listing and Razazi, depending on their price, maybe it is a win bet on both of them, acknowledging that you're slashing your price. Or if one of them just gets a ton of money poured into them, I'll take the bigger price of the 2 and make a play there. And then in that payoff leg, in a perfect world, I'd be playing pick 3s, and I can just verbalize the logic or the thought behind it. In all likelihood, it's probably going to be some combination of, in the first leg in the Belmont Oaks, using the 4, the 6, and the 8, the 4 Faithful Departed, who we didn't really touch on a ton, but kind of the case is obvious. She's just an improving type. She's getting better and better. She defeated Tam Tam, who was the next out winner in the Teppan by almost 6. I'd be tiering them. And when I say tiering, a lot of people talk about the Steve Christ ABC method. I'm much more of mains and backups. I don't like to get too far into the weeds there, but with pick threes, that may be the exception. So I'd probably go six as an A along with the eight, and then the four is probably a backup. Then you get into the Suburban. I don't know how I would tier it just yet, but it's 2, 6, 7, 8, with a lot of that going through the 6 and 8 Phileas Fogg and Hit Show into the four. And the four is going to be, kind of the home run swing in Third Coast. Tiering it, if I put a couple $100 into it, in all likelihood, you're looking at pick threes that are ranging between $50 and $10 or $15. I would hope that would return, if I were to get a live to Third Coast, I would hope that would return at least 10,000, if not closer to 20.
So you're trying to make the big score using Third Coast in that third leg of the pick three.
And then as sort of the logical saver, it would be the €2 that we talked about, the 9 title roll, the 6 Pacific Avenue on top, and an exacta in the 4th Third Coast and second.
So, and by having your key horse in that last leg, then you can reroute if you need to. If you get knocked out, you could still always bet Third Coast in that last race. If you aren't live to him, you could bet him to win, or in some other bets, maybe with Pacific Avenue and title roll and stuff. So you have to wait and see what. But if you're live to him, you don't really need to make any win bets on him. You'll be making a pretty good score if you're live to him at 20-1.
Yeah, and that's the other beauty of it, right? If you're alive, your wager for the race is effectively in already. You don't really have to think much about it. You just kind of enjoy the lead up to the race and hope things work out. And to your point, if I got bounced in one of the prior legs, the only difference now becomes, instead of just playing that exacta of 9 and 6 over the 4, I play that and I'll play the 4 to win, knowing that we're going to get that price that we talked about, at least 15, if not probably closer to 20-1.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is one advantage of in the payoff leg of horizontals, you really like a horse, then if you do get knocked out, you have some other things you can do to adjust. And you don't have to invest a whole bunch in that horizontal pick either, right? Because if you do get knocked out, you can always come back and play your long shot to win. So you don't have to, that's part of the problem is, and in the book I talk about scared money. You got to be careful in these horizontal bets that if it's a lot of money for you, it's more than you want to lose. You were basically when you're singling a horse in a horizontal, it's like making a win bet on that horse. It's all riding on that horse's nose. If you've got so much betting in the horizontal, you're reluctant to do that, and you want to spread just because you don't want to have it all riding on one horse, you're probably betting too much. And you're betting with what Mark Kramer calls scared money, and that's when you get all spready and defensive. So it's really good that you try to make those horizontal bets with the amount of money you're willing to lose, right? That you're not afraid to lose. Because once you start betting so much into a pick 5 that you're afraid to lose and you're afraid to get knocked out of a leg, then you're not making efficient bets. So that's why it's probably not the best bet for a lot of people, unless you're well bankrolled or well heeled, because you don't want to be betting so much that you're just afraid to make a losing bet, because that almost always means you're making a bad bet.
And on top of that, I also think it sort of lends itself to lazy handicapping, where you just sort of shrug and you're like, oh, you don't actually focus in on the horses that you have identified as either likely win contenders or horses that are likely to be significant overlays. I think at that point, you're just kind of painting with an extremely broad brush. And that's a pool that you probably need to be taking the fine brush and kind of, really highlighting things, as opposed to just slapping a bunch of paint on it and hoping for the best.
Yeah, especially when you get into the shorter horizontals, like a pick 3. You got to be really careful, because if you start spreading in a pick 3, it's really not good, unless you are completely, there's short price favorites you're leaving out of 2 or 3 of the legs. But I mean, you got to be really careful about spreading beyond a couple horses. in a pick three because you're leaking equity really fast. You can get away with one spread, more of a spread leg, maybe in a pick five if you got strong opinions in other legs. But in the pick three, if you start spreading much in any leg, it's going to be hard to overcome that long term, unless you're really getting some good payouts by beating some really short priced horses or catching some really long priced ones.
Yeah, and kind of to that point of when I'm talking about tiering things, obviously it's all with the sort of onus of getting into a big price in the payoff leg to begin with, but in those legs leading into it, in all, I don't want to say all, I don't, nothing definitive, but in most circumstances, in the first two legs, I'm probably using between 2 and 4 horses. I don't, and that 4 is at most. I wouldn't want to go more than that for that reason, because again, then you're suddenly getting into a situation where, well, you really don't have much of an opinion at that point. And maybe this isn't the day. While you do have a horse that you like at a big number, maybe it shouldn't be this bet that you're making.
Yeah, you don't have to make. Yeah,
correct.
You don't have to play the pick three, right? You can play.
I would rather be, really honing in on a sequence and getting narrow. And you know what? There's also nothing wrong with being wrong. It happens, right? But I think you need to be willing to lose to make that score. And so many people, whether it's an ego thing or whatever the case may be, they're just afraid of saying, well, that was a swing and a miss. I was incorrect there. I think the minute you become comfortable with acknowledging that this may not go the way you want it to is when you actually unlock the full potential of what your windfall could be.
Yeah, you have to, form an opinion. If you don't have one, then don't bet. If you do, make sure you structure your bet around that opinion. Don't start hedging or spreading just because you're afraid to lose.
Right. 100%.
Okay, anything else? That was good. Let's hope the weather cooperates, and we have racing on the turf, and we have a fair track for horses to run over. But pay attention, see what's happening out there on the track, and if the conditions change, because you don't want to go into it with one set of assumptions and then bet according to those assumptions when a lot of those have gone away. So be light on your feet, especially at Saratoga. This is not a good track to put your bets in the beginning of the day and then go do something and come back and see how they did.
Yeah, I was going to say the storm clouds can roll in very quickly up at the spa.
And that's one of the disadvantages of horizontal wagers, especially like a pick 5 or pick 6. You never know when all of a sudden they're going to take races off the turf, and you're kind of stuck with it. So you got to factor all that in when you're making your wagers.
Yes, be ready to dance when you need to.
Yes. All right, that'll wrap things up. Thanks again, Matt, for joining me today, and to all the listeners who, without you, wouldn't have a show. That'll conclude episode 368 of the Sport of Kings podcast. Good luck this weekend, and please enjoy the Brooklyn Boogaloo Blowout. Cheers.
Yeah.